All right, I believe we are live now, and welcome to the Lovecraft eZine Sunday show. Got to figure out an actual name for it. Talk show, I don't know. Today is, let's see, October the 12th, 2014, and we have author Stephen Mark Graney, gentleman on your screen right now. Um, I actually, as viewers probably know, I do an author of the week every Sunday, and I actually had Mark as the author of the week. And if you want to, we'll talk to Mark about his books, but if you want to get a list of his Lovecraftian novels, novellas, collections, and so forth, short story collections, you can go to the Lovecraft eZine website, and that's the that's the post for today. So I'll click on that and check that out. Um, how are you, Mark?
I'm pretty good, and I really appreciate you having me on again. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, no problem. Really had a good time talking with you last time. Um, you've written a lot of Lovecraftian horror. One thing I wanted to ask you is, what do you think is? I'm going to ask this on the message board, and I think it's an excellent question. Hey, Olivia, if you keep having
Hey,
problems, I'll send you a different link, see if that works.
no, that's okay. This is a new computer, but it's another old one I have, and it's like, I just need to like sell more stories and write faster so I can get paid more money and I can buy a new fucking computer.
Yeah, like Mark and Joe, they're rich. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. Geez, you can live a lavish life of I don't know. If you're in the basement of your apartment building rather than on a regular floor.
mhm.
Well, see, I've discovered the key. What I have to do is write a bestseller every night, and I'm good to go. I'm 12 words into the next bestseller.
Oh,
I've got a
wow.
lot of work to do tonight.
Oh, I got a whole paragraph, so
Bastard.
I'll be
Uh,
in Hammersmith before ye.
That's actually another question I have for you. All kidding aside, in a little bit about what do different writers and how do they see themselves as successful? What makes a successful author? And I don't think it's really about money. Of course, that's always nice. But getting back to my first question first, writing Lovecraftian fiction and cosmic horror, what do you think are what's important to you when you write a story that's Lovecraftian or with those elements?
Yeah. I alluded to it in the questions that you had sent earlier, and it to me it goes mostly to a fear of something unknown. I mean, we like to think that we are advanced and we have any problem in the world that some way we'll figure out how to lick it. A lot of things we can do like that, but at heart, I feel like no matter how brilliant, how advanced the human race becomes, I don't think we will ever fathom an infinitesimal percentage of the knowledge that could exist out there, and so we're always going to know a lot less than we know,
Yeah.
and that offers a lot of possibilities for exploration, and I'm just always drawn to the dark side of the unknown. I mean, I remember writing a happy story once, and I tore it up, threw it away. So I always just I get more a sense of exhilaration when I'm writing about something that is simply not comprehensible, and that is to me the challenge, is how to make something that's incomprehensible, that's something that's unknown, and make it engaging. That's true for any story, I think, but in the speculative realm, I think focus on people, focus on characters. You're dealing with a great unknown. So my stories tend to be more about the people and how they deal with an unknown, rather than something didactic. I like to focus on the human emotional side of it.
Now, the article that you just mentioned, the post today on the Lovecraft eZine website. I was really intrigued by one of your answers when I asked you, what is it about Lovecraftian horror and weird fiction that appeals to you? And you start off saying, I've told this story 1,000 times, but for me it's a pivotal thing that must be credited. Can you tell that story here? Because I think that's just so wonderful. I was imagining that as I was reading that, and what that must have been like.
Yeah, now I was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 years old, and the house where I grew up, which is where I'm sitting right now, as a matter of fact, of course now there's a good bit more population in the area, but it was largely rural, very wooded, lots of wildlife. And we don't have them anymore, which is really, really sad. But those woods were filled with whippoorwills when I was a kid, and they have a sort of an eerie, mournful sound. And back then, there was no way you could convince me that these noises were coming from a harmless little bird. To me, they were ghostly and chilling in their way. Part of that probably came from watching monster movies and science fiction movies, and hearing like monster sounds, you know. So somehow those whippoorwill calls translated into my young mind as something menacing. And I look back on that, I think about how terrified. I mean, I remember being in the bed and being frozen with terror from these sounds, and my parents were certainly didn't quite comprehend, but my dad would go out into the backyard and start throwing rocks into the woods to try to scare away the whippoorwills so that I could actually get some sleep.
Oh, what a good dad.
Yeah. But that goes very much toward my point about the fear of the unknown. To me, that was something unknown. It was something I couldn't see. All I could get was one sensory experience, the sound that they made.
Right.
And to this day, I think sounds are very powerful stimulant. And I play, you know, I've used the theme of sound many times in my Lovecraftian stuff. You know, I've written stories like The Spheres Beyond Sound. I edited the Song of Cthulhu for Chaosium, and I think that my predilection toward that, you know, and the music of eZine is one of my favorite Lovecraft songs. And I think it all goes back to that very early terror that I felt of noises, unknown noises.
That fear of the unknown is something that I think a lot of writers forget. I go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but Rick, you've probably seen it, maybe some of the others of you too. But I caught up. I was real sick this past week, so I was laying in bed, and I caught up on Doctor Who from this season. And that there's an episode where he talks about what if there's a creature that is perfectly evolved to hide. And I thought that, did you see that episode, Rick?
Yeah, the thing under the bed.
Yeah, the thing under the bed, and how that everyone's had that dream. And that episode did such a great job of highlighting the fear of the unknown. I'm not going to give anything away for those who haven't seen it.
Without showing you really anything, too.
Yes, absolutely. It didn't show a thing, but it was a scary episode. It really was.
Yeah, it was.
There's one scene where there's something under the bedspread, and that's all I'll say, but it's terrifying.
Probably the scariest thing they ever did in Doctor Who. But I have a question for Mark.
Yeah.
You mentioned this obsession with whippoorwills, so I assume you later read the Dunwich Horror and
Sure.
And got a new outlook on it.
Yeah, I think when I first started reading Lovecraft, and he actually brought in the element of the whippoorwills, boy, that sure made a personal connection right there. And going to the subject of sound, here's a question: some of you older folks, not that there are any really old folks here, have any of you ever seen an old movie? I think it was late 50s or early 60s, called The Sound of Horror. I believe it was a Spanish movie. It's a black and white movie. It was zero budget. I mean, this was the smallest possible budget that a movie could have.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, it treads the line between absolute brilliance and sheer stupidity. But it's about a dinosaur. But because they had no money, it's an invisible dinosaur. It's about a dinosaur that camouflages itself by becoming invisible. And the thing is, it's a stupid movie, and yet at the same time, there are parts of this movie that are absolutely chilling because you can never see what's coming, but you can hear it. That's why it's called The Sound of Horror. It's got this shrill, eerie sound that at least a portion of this sound is almost whippoorwillish. So when I saw this thing, I was probably in my teens maybe, or early 20s when I actually saw this thing for the first time, and I thought, I can't believe, that a movie this stupid has actually gotten me on edge. But it was the noise. The noise of it is brilliant. I've got the movie on DVD every now and then. It's one of those movies I just got to pull out and watch,
Now, don't let me hog the questions. I know you've known Joe a long time. Joe, you want to interject?
I was just going to say is, in addition to you guys having whippoorwills down there when you were a little shaver, all those millennia back, the first time I was at Bob's, I was sitting out on the porch and it got dark, and out of the blue, the cicadas kicked in.
Oh, yeah.
And this old boy was standing bolt upright in a goddamn hurry, because it was like, what is that?
You thought the Martians were coming, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd heard this stuff in movies, but here I am. I'm sitting on a front porch on a quiet little street, and across the street's this wonderfully manicured little garden with a little brick bungalow that's old, and I saw the elder couple who lived there all day tending the garden. It was enchanting. And then you get this sound, it's like, holy shit! I mean, that had to scare the bejesus out of you when you were a little kid.
I think the first time I experienced that, I was probably somewhere between 10 and 13.
Oh, okay.
And I woke up one morning and I heard this noise, and you think about the sound cicadas make individually. That's nothing like it at all. This is a just all-consuming sound that comes from everywhere and nowhere. It's a warbling, whistling, humming sound that's absolutely constant, and I swear to God, it sounds like the sound effect from the flying saucer, from a 1950.
Yeah, and one of the things I found odd was at one point it almost sounded like some really odd version of a power saw or something.
Yeah, I can see that. It sounds mechanical. It doesn't sound like insects. It sounds like some machine is making that noise.
Yeah.
Joe, there's a film Joe and I like, Barbarian Sound Studio.
Yeah.
Which does a fabulous job with sound and the production of sound and its importance to horror.
We both love the film. The sound design is perfect.
It's on Netflix streaming too, by the way, for everybody watching.
I didn't catch. What is it?
Barbarian Sound Studio.
I put a link to IMDb on the eZine website.
Yeah, Mark, you know what? You would really like it with what you're talking about.
It's about this frumpy British sound engineer who's hired by these Italians to come to Italy and do the sound design for their horror film. And he doesn't normally do this kind of stuff. So I won't say any more other than that, but it's a really wonderful film. The sound design is brilliant. Toby Jones, who I just adore, does a great job in the film.
It's a really creepy film, and it's because of the sound.
It was no gore. No
Right.
violence or really gore in that movie, but it's frightening.
Well, see, we don't see anything, but we hear plenty.
Yeah,
Well,
well, that's the point. We're voyeurs, but it's aoral. It's not visual.
Right.
That definitely sounds like it's right down my line. I'm gonna keep an eye
Yeah,
out
I
for
mean,
that one.
the thing is you are forced to fill in all the blanks.
Yeah.
You hear it, but you don't see it. It's like, and that just torques up the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
based
the
on
sound of horror is much like that too. You don't see anything of it until the end, and then it's a black cardboard cutout.
Right, and I mean that's the dance as writers we're always engaged in, is to have the reader bring their fears into it.
Mhm.
You know, it's like being Hitchcock. Lead them up to the cliff, but don't push them off. Let them jump themselves. Because you can't. Every reader is different. You don't know exactly what pushes their button. So if you can give them nuggets and then let them do all the fine tuning, you get better reaction out of your readers if you do it right.
You pretty much just covered my philosophy right there. As far in my fiction, you really touched on something there. Is given the readers crucial information, but not all the information.
Right.
Right.
And some stories shouldn't wind up with a nice bow. You know, leave everybody in the dark. Let them scratch to figure out what it was exactly.
Mm.
I mean, okay. And the winner is.
Yeah, bingo.
Ding-a-ling.
Mark, you got a list. You listed your books on today's post. Again, for the people that just joined, today's post at Lovecraft eZine. I asked Mark some questions in the post, and he lists his Lovecraftian books. The first two that you list are you say that Other Gods is a good sampler of your short stories, and you also talk about your novel a little bit, Blue Devil Island. Can you talk about both of those books briefly? Yeah, let me put you on the screen there, Rick. There we go.
There's Other Gods.
Yeah, Other Gods is from Dark Regions, and it's available in the trade paperback. I think you can also get it as hardback still. And I don't recall offhand whether it's available as an ebook. I know Dark Regions is starting to do a bunch of ebooks. If it's not yet, probably will be.
I'll take a look. No, it's not on Amazon as a Kindle.
Okay. That one is all. I believe Other Gods is all reprints. It's sort of a representative sampling of what I consider the best candidates to fit into the Lovecraftian universe that I've been working on for years and years. I believe that one includes Fugue Devil, which is one of my earliest, but what I consider one of the most personal and effective exercises in Lovecraftian fiction. It's based very much on a night horror. I hesitate to call it a nightmare. This was a dream I had in my teen years, early teens, that woke me up 3 separate times during the night in a cold sweat. I've never had an experience before or since like that, and it took me 20 years to come up with a vehicle for that particular story. I changed a lot of it, of course, but I kept these core elements that had so terrified me. And Other Gods includes that story.
What was the name of that one again, that particular short story?
It's called Fugue Devil.
Fugue Devil, okay. All right.
I believe that one has The Spheres Beyond Sound, which I wrote in the mid-'80s, and that was it was a direct tie-in to the music of eZine that I wrote before I had ever even heard of the Evil Dead movies. And then I went to see the Evil Dead movie. I think I actually saw Evil Dead 2 before I saw the first one. But then, and I'm thinking, these bastards stole my ideas, before I ever had them, which kind of sucked, because I was afraid people were going to read that story and say, well, he stole that idea from the Evil Dead. Well, no, I'd never even heard of the Evil Dead when I wrote it, but readers do seem to connect with that story. That's included in there. I believe in that book. Sometimes it's hard to remember which story is in which book, but one of them, I don't remember, Children of Burma. It's a World War II story that was the precursor to Blue Devil Island. If it's not in Other Gods, it's probably in the doc. It's in one of my collections. But anyway, Other Gods span. It's fiction from 20 years worth or more of my writing, so it encompasses all different time periods of the short fiction that I was writing.
Children of Burma is in Legends of the Night.
Oh, okay. I knew it was in there somewhere.
Then, of course, Blue Devil Island takes place in, well, there's World War II elements strongly. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I've always had a real fondness for military history, particularly military aviation. I've always loved airplanes. I love to fly, and the idea of airplanes with guns has always, to me, that's always just been rather thrilling. And from the time I was a youngster, I would build model airplanes, mostly World War II fighter airplanes, and airbrush them and detail them and learn everything there was to learn about the planes, the pilots, the time period. I became, at a very early age, fascinated with World War II, both European and Pacific theaters, but there was something about the air wars in the Pacific that really caught my interest. And back, it's been over a decade, but quite a few years ago, I discovered a World War II flight simulator called Air Warrior. And there's a newer generation of it called Aces High that I still occasionally play, but it's an immersive, interactive combat flight simulator where you actually do have to learn all the ins and outs of flying. You have to learn how to fly a plane before you can actually go up and do any dogfighting with other players who are doing the exact same thing you are online. All the planes have their own unique flight characteristics based directly on the designs from the World War II planes. And I got immersed in this back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that renewed my interest in researching World War II aviation. And over time, I got to think, well, I really would like to tell a story set in World War II, and some of my favorite nonfiction books were first-hand accounts of air missions by pilots from World War II. I read those voraciously when I was probably in my teens and 20s. And I decided when I wrote Blue Devil Island that I was going to write it just like these first-hand accounts that the pilots wrote that I read so much. And needless to say, I couldn't write a air war novel without making it a Cthulhu mythos air war novel. So that's what happened, and that the blend of it I kind of took from the old. Some of you may remember back in the day there was there were comics called Star Spangled War Stories, and they were war stories, but it had soldiers pitted against dinosaurs and such. They were fabulous. So I decided I was going to take some elements like that, make them Lovecrafty, and tell it from the pilot's perspective, first person. Bring in a lot of this knowledge that I had of actually flying, and see if I couldn't throw this into the mix and make a good story out of it. So it took me, I think 3 years is about what I spent writing Blue Devil Island, and it went through several metamorphoses before it was done, but I was very, very happy with the result. And when it came out, I had been in touch with a couple of the original Flying Tigers when I was writing it. Got a couple of brief accounts of things, but to me, the crowning moment to let me know that Blue Devil Island had been fairly successful was a World War II pilot who had flown Hellcats in the Pacific called me on the phone, and he said, "I couldn't believe you weren't there." He said there were a few details that, were maybe a little sketcy, but for the most part, he said you captured what you needed to capture. And I remember getting off the phone and running around in circles yelling. Because that was just, that told me I must have done something right there.
Cool.
Yeah.
That novel is also notable for a sneaky Dark Shadows reference.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. The Collins character.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a very offhand throwaway reference, but yeah, I have done a lot of Dark Shadows work. The audio dramas that I wrote one of the Dark Shadows novels for HarperCollins, so I couldn't resist throwing a little Dark Shadows tie-in in there as well.
Do you know about those, Rick?
You can read the essay on your website.
Yeah.
And for those people watching that don't know, in addition to being a kind of a Lovecraft geek, Mark's also a Dark Shadows junkie, and he's got a wee little passion for that kaiju, that what's it, Gojira?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
How did you like the latest movie?
What, the Godzilla movie?
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty good. It wasn't great, but the people scenes were a lot duller than I expected them to be. Some of the monster scenes were really good. Godzilla was all right, so I liked it. I didn't love it.
And you mentioned feeling successful in writing that book, especially when you got that phone call.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about and get your take on, somebody, I get this question a lot actually, but someone brought it up again the other day. What makes a writer feel successful? And I mentioned the fact that so many writers and editors and small press publishers, we don't make much of anything, and when it comes to money, but I think about guys like you, Joe, Rick, and Pete's got 2 novels out now as successful writers. Even but you guys, most of you have day jobs. Can you talk a little bit about that? What makes you feel successful as a writer? What keeps you going?
I don't usually think in terms of am I successful or unsuccessful. I have successes. It may be an individual story, it may be a book, or just an effort, an idea, something that I've done, or I may get a whopping advance or a royalty check. And you can believe when I get a really big royalty check, I'm suddenly feeling really successful. I don't feel successful in that regard as often as I would like to. But every now and then, it's a really good thing. But I have been asked, to what do you attribute your success? And I don't even know how to answer that, because I look at what I'm doing as a series of challenges. Every time I sit down to create a new story, a new book, whatever it happens to be, it's just another challenge. And if I sell it for money, if I sell it to a reputable publisher, whatever form that takes, whether it's a print book or an e-book, I consider a story in Lovecraft eZine that's a pretty good mark of success for me. If I get a work out in front of people, if I get any feedback at all, sometimes if I find that people hated it, and I've had a few that people hated, and I thought, well, by God, it worked because it elicited a response.
Right.
One of my stories, called Orchestra, is a tie-in to my novel Balak. It has the same character, whose one of his aliases is John Hanger. some of the criticism of my novel Balak was that this character didn't have sufficient motivation to do what he was doing. So when I was writing one of these other stories, Orchestra, that featured Balak, the biblical king, under the alias of John Hanger, is that I gave him some motivation, and it had to do with his treatment at the hands of the Israelites back in the biblical days. Well, suddenly I started getting, I got several notes and a couple of reviews that, oh my God, I'm anti-Semitic. The writer has got to be this horrible anti-Semitic person.
Yeah, no matter what you do, someone's going to be pissed.
Yeah, well, you know, that's one of the dangers of psychoanalyzing someone based on their work. But, you know, surely, yeah, it was pretty nasty toward Jews, yes. But that was, I'm writing about a character who was persecuted by I guess it was Moses' day, you know, back in definitely Old Testament days.
Right.
And so, yeah, so he's been given immortality by the old ones, the other gods. And so, yeah, he carries a grudge. It's not my grudge, it's my character's grudge. But I figured if I've got a character with that kind of background, then I'm going to present it as such. And so I actually considered that to be fairly successful, that it pissed off some people, you know.
Yeah.
And I got paid for it too, so that was a double success.
Orchestra is in Legends of the Night, if you want to.
Yeah.
And successes are wonderful things, and they're odd things. And I know some other people who. The other thing is, successes are that carrot on a stick. You're starting off, and you want to get your first story published, and you do, and man, you're having a great time. But that comes and goes, and then you're on to the next thing, and this stick keeps moving.
That's exactly right. You just nailed it right there. I don't ever consider a point where I've become successful. I'm forever pursuing success, and I suspect that as long as I write, that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, because like Mark, it's like, okay, I did that. I'm now into a new story, so it's brand new. It never existed before. Everything that came before it, unless it's one of those rarities where it's a direct sequel, I'm in a completely different sandlot. I've never been here before. And all I can focus on is this new playground. But things that, if success, if we can equate it to being proud, then I still think the greatest successes are when out of the blue you hear from a reader and they tell you they love such and such book, or this story really blew their mind, or something. Just a few days ago, I heard from somebody out of the blue about Blood Will Have Its Season, which, okay, that's collection's now, 5, 6 years old. So for somebody to tell me how much, they love and have loved an older work of mine, it's like, yeah, it's touching, it's humbling. It brings you back to why you're doing this to start with. But again, Thomas Ligotti out of the Blurred. You didn't solicit it, your publisher did it on the side. And he said, yeah, it's really cool. It's like, it is.
Jeff,
for a while.
Oh,
But,
there it is.
Okay. Joe, cut out there for a minute.
Oh. They're when you're recognized by your peers, when they say your work is notable, that you feel successful then. But again, you're constantly working, so the carrot constantly moves down the road because you're focused on a new work, and you've never, it's a brand new work. So
It's always
you're too busy creating it to think about success. You know, because it's only when it's done, or at least on my part, it's only when it's done do I start thinking about readers. And then I start panicking. It's like, oh my God, somebody's going to read this. Oh shit, you know.
Yeah, well, every now and then, I've been known to actually look back at one of my old stories. I tend not to do that because I hate everything I've ever written, and I'm not being too facetious here. I actually actively loathe an awful lot of the stuff that I've written before, and I didn't loathe it when I was doing it,
right?
But it doesn't represent me as I am now. If I were to write the same story now, I look back at something I wrote 20 years ago, I might have the same idea today, but I'd do it completely different, and I'd like to think in my head that I'm doing it better. But the success part of that, I think, is that every now and then I'll look at something that I wrote a while back, and I don't hate it. And I think, you know, I must have done something right there, because, you know, every author is his worst critic, or so they say. Sometimes it's true. But some of y'all maybe even have the book or heard of it. The new, I know Pulver here, in the Court of the Yellow King. It's a new collection from Solano Press of King and Yellow stories.
I'm in that.
I wrote a story for that I so don't hate it. Honest to God, I don't hate it. I actually love this story. I wrote it. There it is. There's the book right there. And it may be the sorriest story I've ever written, but I actually fell in love with writing the story, and I can't explain it, but I feel like I was successful with it because I can read portions. I can pick it up right now, read a portion of it, and somehow, and I suspect it's because the source material isn't mine. I mean, I didn't create the King in Yellow, but so I'm working in at least something of a pre-existing universe. But the words I wrote, I can look at that and go, damn, at least for this small bit of it, I did it justice. And there are portions of my story that I find strangely haunting, because I think when I wrote it, I decided I was going to write this story as if in the vein of David Lynch. If David Lynch were writing The King in Yellow, this is how he would do it. And I'm going to be the first to say I was playing copycat in my own mind. I was emulating an artist I admire, and yet in doing that, I branched out into this area of writing that I don't feel like I've ever done before, and I feel like I was actually successful there. People may disagree with me, but
it's good to stretch out.
You do.
Stretching out is, I mean, whether I'm successful or not in my endeavors, I think of myself as a very restless writer. I'm never happy. I'm not happy only doing this or only doing that. You know, style-wise, I'm always in search of what's over there. I never played with this. Stretching out. I mean, part of you were talking about being unhappy when you look back, and I'm the same way. Because on those occasions when I do look back, it's like, oh my God, I hate that sentence. You wrote that? Wow, I'd love to change that sentence. But it's the act of creativity when we're doing them.
Yeah.
We're so deep into them, we don't know if it's good or bad or whatever, because we're trying to pull everything we got into this keyboard. And that's the fire. I mean, I see it as we're junkies. We're getting, as much as I'm swearing at this keyboard when I'm struggling with working on a story, you also get high doing it.
I put it in different words, but I said pretty much the same thing in the questions I answered for Mike today on the interview questions you sent me today. Was that however much I might hate what I've already written, writing has been probably one of the truest joys of my adult life. I really it's something I'm compelled to do. It is an addiction. I don't think. I mean, I want to get paid, and from here on out, I expect to get paid. I don't send a story out unless I have a very good chance of actually making some money for it. But
Right.
that aside, I'd be writing something. I would always want to write words. I'm driven to do this. So yeah, I am a junkie.
Yeah,
I like
driven,
to ask
absolutely.
varying writers this question because, you and others, because I want to, as a small press publisher and editor, and I want to help dispel this notion that you're a successful writer, author, whatever, when you're making money, when when you can quit your job because you're making so much money. I think some beginning writers see it as this progression where you sell a short story somewhere, and then you sell another short story, and then another one, and then you write a novel, and then suddenly you write this novel where everybody knows your name and you're making millions. And for 95% of the writers out there, if not more, that's not the way it is, but yet they're successful.
Yeah, I was actually given some advice from a senior editor at Tor,
Mhm.
never to quit my day job until it's absolutely necessary. If you've got great benefits and a steady paycheck, hang on to it as long as possible.
And insurance.
Yeah.
Insurance. Yeah.
You know who Pat
Yeah,
Roth
because
is?
the first law here is the tide goes in, the tide goes out. You can sell 3-4 stories in a row, and then all of a sudden you can't do anything.
Matt, were you going to say something?
You guys know Patrick Rothfuss?
Yeah.
He wrote The Name of the Wind, which is a wildly popular fantasy novel. He's been working on it for, I don't know, more than 10 years, of course, while he taught part-time creative writing at a small branch of the University of Wisconsin. He lived up in, Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Basically living on ramen noodles. And he said when he got to be famous because of this book, and he was in big demand at conventions, as naturally, a lot of aspiring writers or interested people would ask him, what advice do you have for aspiring writers? And he said, live somewhere cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was able to, by being a teaching assistant and living in a efficiency apartment, survive in this small university town in rural Wisconsin, whereas if he had been in New York, he would have been selling plasma.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said for having a day job, I think. Part of what I think allows for my success, such as it is that I do have a day job. This allows me to write what I want, not what I would have to write. For example, I know any number of writers who don't have a day job, who subsist solely off their writing, and I don't think my temperament is up for that. I like the steady paycheck. I like the benefit. And having the luxury of writing what I want to write. I'm going to bring up my friend Elizabeth Massey, who is maybe the most prolific writer, and she writes in every conceivable genre. She writes horror. She writes mainstream. She writes children's books. She writes educational material. It would exhaust me to have to write that. I don't think I would enjoy writing if just living required me to write on the scale that she does. Now, I have nothing but the most absolute admiration for someone who does that, but that lifestyle is one that I think would drive me to drinking more than I already do. I mean, that would probably put me in an early grave, the stress level of that. She looks at it differently. She says it allows her to live her life on her own terms. She's not beholden to a boss other than herself, and I admire that. There are times I wish to God I didn't have to answer to anyone except me and the IRS. But in order to do that, unless I was wildly successful, and made a mint off of a book or select number of books, if that happens in my lifetime, fine. But if it doesn't, I'm going to go on my merry way and be very pleased that I can write the material that I really want to write, that I'm driven to write.
Right.
I don't know if I could have that passion if getting up in the morning meant that I had to write a lot of stuff I really didn't want to, just to pay the bills.
Yeah.
Jeff Vandermeer wrote that recent trilogy, the Annihilation trilogy, or whatever it's called. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. My youngest son is taking honors English, and he has to analyze these articles from the New York Times. He likes me to read over his papers before he submits them. And he showed me the article. It was a very interesting paper about preservation of lighthouses on the East Coast. Or was it the West Coast? I don't remember. It was written by Jeff Vandermeer.
Yeah.
He just published this fall. And this guy's a reasonably successful writer, but I think when he sees an opportunity, he's going to take it.
Well, actually, for Area X, there's a whole subtext about lighthouses. So he did a lot of research on lighthouses and lighthouse preservation. So, if you do the research, you use it as many times as possible.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff, that.
Mark, you're into geocaching. I was wondering if you'd talk about that just for a minute, and I was wondering if I don't remember. I don't have the best memory if I asked you this question last time you were on the show, but if I did, maybe you'd answer it again. If you're into geocaching, talk about that, and talk about. I can definitely see some Lovecraftian short story possibilities there.
Oh yeah. Well, the story I'm working on at this very moment is a geocaching Lovecraftian tale.
There you go.
That came to me just last week. I was up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with my girlfriend. She grew up in Michigan, and so we visited her folks in Midland in the Mitten, and then we went up for a few days into the Upper Peninsula, which is sparsely populated, to say the least.
Yeah.
Lots of trees. It was fall season had just set in. Everything was at its peak, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And it's full of geocaches. Michigan is a great state for geocaching for sure, but caching is a kind of scavenger hunt where a person hides a container of some size or variety. It could be anything from the size of a pencil eraser to a Rubbermaid bin this big. It can be any size. It just needs to be large enough to accommodate a piece of paper, a log sheet that you sign. What the hider records the latitude and longitude coordinates on a handheld GPS. Then post those coordinates on the geocaching website, and other cachers then put those coordinates into their GPS and go out and hunt the thing. It may be difficult. It may be hidden in plain sight. It may be out in the woods. In fact, that's what got me into caching in the first place, was the fact that so many of them were out on the trails in the woods. I've always enjoyed hiking in the woods.
Are a lot of them buried, or is it just
no? You can't actually. They're not allowed to be actually buried.
Okay.
They can be covered over,
okay.
But you're not supposed to use tools to have to hide or retrieve them. So I couldn't go out into the woods and dig a hole and put it and have X marks the spot or something like that. It has to blend into the environment more naturally. Geocaching is very environmental. It's supposed to be a very environmentally friendly activity, and there are thousands of them. I'll bet you every last one of you is sitting within a mile or less of a geocache. Probably many. Most communities are full of them in the Piedmont triad where I live, there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of them. The Upper Peninsula in Michigan, for as sparsely populated as it is, there's geocaches all over the place. So you go out and you hunt them. When you find them, like I said, each one contains a log sheet, and then you sign it to show that you've been there, and then you log it online on the geocaching website. And one of the big questions people ask is, well, what do you get? I mean, do you get cash? Do you get some kind of... No, you're doing it for the sake of the hunt. It's about the hunt, of going out there, seeing the outdoors. For me, I credit caching with losing 25 pounds and stopping smoking, because once I got out there hiking after these suckers, I realized I can either smoke or I can go caching. I got bitten by the caching bug immediately. Once I got going with
their website, I like what they say here. Geocaching is the real-world treasure hunt that's happening right now all around you. There are 2,512,000 active geocaches and over 6 million geocachers worldwide.
Yeah, it's really gained popularity in the last couple of years. They've made a lot of pushes to promote caching, which it's a double-edged sword. I kind of like the fact that, especially law enforcement, because it can be kind of suspicious. You see somebody sneaking around a back of a building somewhere, you know, looking around a guardrail or a telephone pole or whatever. I mean, like I said, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And they, I mean, every now and then they call out a bomb squad and they blow up a geocache because somebody thought it was a bomb. I've had to educate law officers in upwards of 30 some times just by way of being in a, you know, some location. I've been accosted by men with shotguns. I've got a friend who had he reached in, you know, the law stopped him to ask him about geocaching, so he reached into his pocket to grab his GPS, not thinking what he was doing, so they drew their guns on him, thinking he was maybe reaching for a gun.
Oh, wow.
It can be fairly exhilarating, but it takes me into many, many areas, remote areas, like up in Michigan, for example. One of the caches was at this graveyard that the earliest grave went back to the very early 19th century. I think it was like 1812 or something was the death date on it, just back in the woods. And there's a lot. Cemeteries are wonderful places for caches. I mean, most older cemeteries, now some states and some locales, you know, they have restrictions against hiding caches in the cemetery per se, but they may be somewhere outside the cemetery. They have what they call multi-caches, where you have to go to a stage. You don't go straight to the cache. You go to some intermediate stage. So you may go to a set of gravestones and record the numbers off dates and stuff like that, and then once you get the appropriate numbers, you plug them into your GPS, and that's what ends up leading you to the cache. So it can be a puzzle-solving thing.
That's really cool.
It is. I love it. I've been doing it since early 2008. I just I've got just shy of 7,500 total finds right now.
Well, like I said, I can really see some Lovecraftian story possibilities there. Can you talk a little bit about your idea, if you want to? I know you're still writing it.
Well, now I had actually started a while back. I had started a novel at the request of Dave Wilson that runs Crossroad Press, because he said somebody's eventually going to write a geocaching novel, and you ought to be the one to do it. And I completely agree with that. And there have been a couple of novels featuring caching, although not as their main focus. But once I started the novel, once I kept going and going, I plotted it out, and I thought everything looked good. But this is a case of going back and reading stuff and realizing I hated it. I was writing more about caching than the novel, and so I kind of put that aside and I needed to work on a bunch of short fiction, but I decided I would sort of take the ideas that I had for this novel and make a short story out of them, and part of it comes from the scenery, the environment that I encountered when I was up in the Upper Peninsula. It's absolutely gorgeous. It was perfect for fall. There's rock formations everywhere. There's waterfalls. There's long hikes into the woods where if you go off the trail, it's 20 miles till the next civilization, and that civilization is a street corner with 2 houses and a bar.
Oh, wow.
So that sense of remoteness really, really appealed to me. And in the story, as it starts, there's a group of people who are actually geocaching, and within the context of the story, I do explain something about caching. But they are accosted by a group of people in a graveyard, in an old graveyard that's patterned after the one I actually found up there. And the people are not quite what they seem. At first they seem rather amiable and taken with the idea of caching, but then things kind of go south, as things tend to do in my stories. But I don't think I'll describe it too much further. In fact, I'm only a few pages into it as we speak.
Yeah. Yeah, it just seems like there's some really good opportunities there.
Say again, Mike?
It just seems like that's a natural fit, I guess you'd say.
I think so. Well, every now and then geocachers have been known to find bodies in the woods and such, and I'm like, you lucky bastards, I never get to find bodies in the woods. What's up with that? As often as I'm out there, I've never found a dead person in the world. I've found dead animal. I find deer skeletons a lot. One time I found
an altar in a circle in a clearing in the middle of the woods, anything like that.
One time I found, not far outside of Greensboro, I found a tower of bricks. There must have been several hundred bricks built up, and on top of it was a rusted-out tricycle. I don't know what that meant, but
wow.
There was an altar with a tricycle on top of it. I found a tree. I mean, the cache led me to the spot. The cache is called Hale is Ahead, and the reason it's called that is because somebody carved into a beech tree, "Hell lies ahead," and it's dated 1961, I think. So in this beech tree, there's a carving called "Hell is just ahead," I think it is. That's fascinating to me that I can find stuff like that. Most of the joy, I don't know if most, a lot of the joy of geocaching is the things that I find along the way. Like I said, it's all about the hunt, not what I might actually get out of a cache. That's trivial.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. I think I'm gonna start doing that with my son. I think he'd get a kick out of it. He's 12 years old. Little boys always.
Geocaching.com and just enter in your location, and it'll bring up a map, and it'll show you, what all's around you.
Okay, geocaching.com. Okay, for everyone out there that's interested. What other questions do we have for Mark, guys? Joe, you want to talk about? Didn't you and Mark used to be in the Calum Club back in the day, or am I thinking of someone else?
Well, when I go down to visit Bob, Mark would come over for the weekend here and there, and we'd hang out and stuff.
He's going to talk about the red shorts.
Yeah, he used to bring his red jammies, and he might have a martini while he was sitting there with his little backdoor button jammies on.
They were red gym shorts I had. They were old classic.
Okay, yeah. All right, folks. Let's get this. This is, you know me. I'm straight up. I remember them as jammies with a trap door in the back.
I
do not remember
knows
any.
Not what he says. Joe is this far from Alzheimer's, man.
Yeah, right. I am probably. But we would, watch Godzilla movies. We would shoot the breeze. We would talk for hours on end. We would just sit there, a handful of us, often just Mark and Bob and I. It would be like 3 kids up in a bedroom on the weekend. talking
Yeah,
about
sometimes-
what we
I
like.
don't remember if you were there. I know every now and then one of the others would we'd read a story. I remember reading a couple of stories over there. I
Yep.
think you were there at the time.
Yep. Much like we did with the Jersey version. Yeah, there was readings occasionally. One of my favorite ones though was, Mark came over for the weekend and I was there, and it was just me and Mark and Bob, and the three of us just hung out and talked. Literally, like three kids hanging around, doing nothing all weekend. We watched a couple of Godzilla movies, and Mark still smoked back then. Went out to the porch, had a cigarette here, and I took my tea, and he had a martini, and we just hung out and had a great time. It was like, we talk about Lovecraft, and you talk about this, and reminiscing, and pizza, of course.
Oh yeah, that was all good stuff. You need to
Yeah.
get back over here so we can do it again.
Yeah, because we don't have real pizza over here.
It's gotta suck.
But yeah, it's a really wonderful thing when, as a writer or as any kind of creator, you can get together with peers and people who are also your friends, and just have a day or two to just hang out, and you don't have to worry about the regular world, and you get to be yourself completely because you're amongst friends. Just and you always come away with it with the great fuel. It's really inspiring when you hang out with somebody like Mark, he's witty, he's very intelligent, he's super creative, really talented. And
How much do you want?
no, you know me. But you get all that rubs off. So and if you talk to me, if you talk to Willem, a whole bunch of people, I could reel off that, and we'll all tell you the same thing. You come away from these things renewed. You have all this best thing. I know Willem a couple of times. Oh, I got writer's block. I couldn't write a word with a gun to my head. And he'll go to like the film festival in Portland and hang around with us for the weekend. And when he gets home, he's all of a sudden writing 6 new books.
Changing your perspective is invaluable, and getting other perspectives from your friends, from peers, from people with similar but divergent ideas. People that you can talk to openly and honestly. That fires up the creative nerve.
Yeah, because as much middle ground and as much as our ideas find this center where they're all the same, or our interests are, there's all kinds of areas where we differ in viewpoint and whatnot. So to have somebody explain to you how and why that works is awfully enlightening. And you can sit and be open and talk. You don't get judged. That's
Well, the rest of us don't.
well, I get judged for everything. It's my role. That's why I got these big shoulders.
That's it. That's it. Very masculine they are too, I must say.
Oh yeah.
What are some of your favorite, whether it's recent or years ago, Lovecraftian novels or short stories? Are there a couple that really stand out in your mind?
Yeah, unfortunately these days I don't read nearly as much as I used to, and unfortunately I have to sort of attribute it to age. I'm on my computer all day at work every day. I try to write every single night, and by the time I'm done, my eyes are fried. I can't look at a page for very long. So I don't read nearly as much as I would like as I used to. So I really haven't kept up the way I would like to. Now, some friends of mine have said, well, try audiobooks, and that, I've actually given that some thought. My girlfriend played the Harry Potter books for me on audio, at least some of the Harry Potter books, and honest to God, I adapted pretty well to listening to audiobooks. So that may be a really viable way of getting in some reading, so to speak, that I don't do as much anymore. I mean, reading has always been a real joy for me. But like I said, at the end of the day, I can't read the way I used to. It's painful. But all that aside, looking back at some of my favorites, I'd have to say that Dark Gods by Ted Klein, his collection there is definitely one of my favorites. I think we talked about this last time, as a matter of fact, because
Dark Gods,
when I read all of the stories in Dark Gods, to me they struck me as to some extent ideals. They made me think, this is the way I want to write. I want to be able to tell these longer, more developed stories that are engaging. The characters are engaging. The settings are well developed and fleshed out. They're very vivid. And the storytelling is such that, like we were talking earlier, Joe brought it up in particular, that you get a lot of crucial information, but not all the information. Mm-hmm. Klein gives you a lot of different things happening, and leaves things to the reader to sort out. Nadelman's God, I remember, was one. The first time I read that, and it struck me that Nadelman's God may have been a tribute to Fritz Leiber's Smoke Ghost, which I've also always quite liked.
My favorite in that collection is Children of the Kingdom.
I think I remember you mentioning that too. My way back when I first read Dark, my first impression was that it was maybe the least of the stories, but in rereading it later, my mind completely changed. It actually maybe as much or more than the others actually made me feel kind of nervous. It's a rare thing that fiction will make me feel nervous. I mean, the real world makes me feel nervous more than I like to admit, but fiction, it's rare for fiction to do that.
Well, most people say Black Man with the Horn out of that collection, and I love it, but I like Children of the Kingdom a bit more. But anyway, what are a few more of your favorites from over the years?
Let's see. As far as Lovecraft himself, one thing I really want to reread is The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. I haven't read that in so many years, but I remember reading that for the first time would have been in the 80s. Then I reread it probably early to mid-90s, and that first reading, it just went, it didn't grab me. And then the second time, suddenly, and I don't know what circumstances were, what made it different, but everything about this short novel engaged me on a level that it didn't previously, and that's been so long that now I'd kind of like to go back and give it another try and see if my perceptions have changed yet again. I have a tendency to go back and reread old things for that very reason, because sometimes I like to see if my perceptions on things have changed appreciably, and they often do.
Yeah.
Now, it's not Lovecraftian, but not necessarily. One of my favorite books is Legion by William Peter Blatty. It's a sequel to The Exorcist. That's one that is scary as hell. To me, even The Exorcist as a book, I found pretty creepy. Legion has moments in that thing that the only comparison I can make to my emotional response was the early days of reading Lovecraft that actually kind of kept me awake. There's a particular section of Legion that is disturbing. It's unnerving to me. I don't know if any of y'all have read that book, but I highly recommend it.
I've read it, and it's always struck me as a supernatural version of the Testament of Dr. Malpuzza. The asylum angle.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to give away what's going on in Testament of Dr. Malpuzza, but the whole asylum angle seems to be based on that.
That's a very interesting perspective. I had never thought of that, but I think you may be onto something there.
I was looking it up on Amazon.
As far as other things, I know most of you have probably read Crypt of Cthulhu and some of the small press magazines out of the 80s contained an awful lot of really good Lovecraftian fiction. I've enjoyed, and this has even been a lot of years, but I've enjoyed reading a lot of Thomas Ligotti's stuff. Speaking of the asylum angle, he wrote a brilliant story years and years ago called Dr. Locrian's Asylum. And I probably hadn't read that in 20 years, but that's another one I'd like to revisit.
Speaking of small press, I heard there was this one, Death Realm. Does that ring a bell? Did you ever read that one?
That one was really awful.
Yeah, I can only collect maybe 12 or 13 issues of that.
Yeah, I have like 9 or 10.
You want to talk a little bit about Death Realm, Joe?
I'll go out on a limb and say I've probably got the biggest collection of Death Realm in the world.
Yeah, you probably do.
Probably.
Although I don't have that much. Several of the issues I only have one personal copy. That is it. There are select issues that had print overruns or had a number of returns or whatever. Some of the later issues, I think, 2 or 3 of the issues, I've probably got a couple of boxes tucked away. Like issues in the mid-20s range, 24, 25, somewhere around there. I've got a ton of those things. But a lot of the early ones, I've got, as far as I know, I've got 1 or 2 copies of issue number 1. I've got 1 copy of issue number 2. 1 of number 6. There was, I think it was issue number 9 that I had no copies of until, this would have been back in the early 90s. I was at I think it was a World Horror Convention, and Paul Ganley was there, and he had a bunch of small press magazines, and he had a copy of number 9 of Death Realm, and so I went and bought it because it was the only copy I was able to get of that particular issue. Somewhere along the line, I ended up selling the last one I had, never really realizing I had sold the last one I had.
That's always amazed me. I remember, I believe it was the second time I went to Bob Price's in Jersey, and a conversation came up, and he had handed me something of his, and I said, oh yeah, and blah blah blah. I never got a copy of that. Oh, and he went to a bookcase and he turned around. He said, I'm sorry, I don't have one to give you. I said, oh, that's okay, no problem. I'll track one down one of these days. And he goes, no, I'd give you one if I had one, but I don't have one. And I was still new at this. Boy, was I new at this. And I'm like, well, but it's your own book. What do you mean you don't have a copy of your own book? And I'm amazed over the years, guys who, they never got a contributor's copy of this, or, they had 5 and they gave 3 away and then thought they had 3 left and gave away 2 more and all of a sudden have none.
Well, certainly as a small press editor, one of my main goals was to sell as many as I could possibly sell, and sometimes that entailed selling more than I realized I had on hand. I remember one issue, I I don't remember which one it was, but I ended up going down to the bookstore to buy back a bunch of copies so I had enough to fill an order.
Yeah, I'm reading from Wikipedia here. Death Room was best known for its high-quality fiction and stunning artwork. One cover illustration by artist Ian McDowell, issue 27, featured an Adobe Photoshop altered image of the artist as a baby. Was considered too controversial by Canadian censors who banned the sale of that issue.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
I had a pretty large standing order from, I believe it was Gordon and Gotch Distributors in Canada, and the art was just like it says. It was a baby picture that Ian had worked up to be this. The baby head had been turned into a skull-like mutation with big bulging eyes and the big smile, you know, a skeletal smile. It was really a pretty disturbing image, but for whatever reason, I got a call one day from a representative at Gordon & Gotch and said, you know, Customs will not allow this to pass into Canada because it presents a favorable perspective of abortion or some garbage like that. You know, but really? they absolutely would not let it cross.
I would never have thought you were going to say that. I would thought you were going somewhere else. Yeah, go on.
But I'm under the impression, and have been for a couple of decades, that Canadian law, as far as any severe abuse towards children and things that might fall under or in and around that umbrella, is pretty damn tough. You know,
yeah, and that may well be.
I know in the past
me, well, what do you
they've banned things.
They said, what should we do with all these? I think it was like 500 copies of the magazine, and they said, do you want them shipped back? And when I did a quick calculation of how much it would cost me to have them shipped back, I said, nah, just dump them. So I don't know whatever happened to them, but in the long run, it actually did pay off for me, though, because of the, I mean, I played that to the hilt, and the next Canadian order for issue number 28 of Death Room, the numbers tripled.
Banned in Canada.
The best I can say was it was an investment. You know? In the long run, it worked out for the better, but I got to say, it was very frustrating and very surprising. I would have had no idea, because I would have never in a million years looked at that cover and go, oh, that's an aborted fetus or something like that. It was like a devil in a baby. Yeah, definitely that. But you know, people see.
Yeah, but sometimes bad press or the whiff of it is a very good thing.
Yeah, I just hope people weren't suddenly disappointed, and it was like, well, the hoopla was over this. You know, I did make a point of, in the back, you know, there was a page for selling back issues in Death Realm. So inside the issue, I reproduced the cover of number 27 quite prominently so that it would show inside the magazine. But, you know, Customs didn't look at the inside of it. They just saw the cover. So the issue after, people got to see what the hoopla was about.
Read it in Canada. So, you know, I have not been lucky enough to read any issues of Death Row. I'll have to see if I can pick some up someday, if that's even possible. But what kind of stuff did you publish? Just straight up horror? Just it varied, or?
Very varied. I started out with the idea that I wanted to, well, you know, Crypt of Cthulhu, Bob Price's Crypt of Cthulhu was really my most direct inspiration to do Death Realm. I had no idea the small press existed.
Yeah.
I had been involved, well, let's go back to the very beginning. In the mid-'70s, as a teenager, I had published a little fanzine called Japanese Giants. It was devoted to Godzilla and such. I had like a film book of Destroy All Monsters and such. That caught the interest of some other writers and artists and creative people that I knew. So when I moved to Chicago in the 80s, a good friend of mine wanted to continue Japanese Giants, and he had good financial resources. He was good at layout. He had all kinds of contacts in Japan for getting information about Godzilla and such. So we put out an issue of Japanese Giants that got actual newsstand distribution.
Oh, awesome.
So at that point, I had about that same time I discovered Crypt of Cthulhu. I was at they had these little monthly mini conventions in Chicago where it was like a big dealer's room that they set up once a month at the Americana Congress Hotel. And Bob Weinberg had a table there all the time, and he was selling copies of small press magazines. I discovered Crypt of Cthulhu, and I'm like, oh my God, somebody else has even heard of this before. So I picked up a few copies of Crypt, absolutely smitten with it, and I thought, this is the kind of thing I would really like to do. I'd like to put together a magazine with maybe some Lovecraftian fiction, scary stuff in general. I wasn't necessarily limiting it to Lovecraftian fiction per se, although I was pretty keen on focusing on Lovecraftian fiction. I had the distribution contacts that I had made through Japanese Giants. I worked for a company that manufactured typesetting systems for ad agencies and such. I was their troubleshooter. I had to run thousands of pages through the typesetting systems to test their integrity, to find problems, etc. And what I ran through those typesetters was almost irrelevant as long as it kept them running. Well, my God, I created some pages for Death Realm, and so I'd run pages for Death Realm through the system and such. So I had professionally typeset graphics. I had all of these things. And so I thought, okay, I had no idea about, with Japanese Giants, the three of us who were the main creators, my friend Bill Goodmanson, Ed Godzichevsky, and myself, we created the bulk of the written material. Some other people contributed a few things, but I thought, well, Death Realm will be cool. I'll try to write a story periodically and put it in Death Realm and talk to a couple of other people I know that are writing stories, and it'll be a cool magazine. I had no idea about stuff like, a negative perception of self-publishing or anything like that. I didn't even see that. To me, it was just a matter of I'm going to put out a magazine, put some content into it.
Yeah.
And so I soon, after the first issue or two, I thought, I had seen a few other small press magazines by then. I thought, well, I'm going to open this up to submissions. And holy cow, I remember that first day after I had a listing in Janet Fox's Scavenger's newsletter. I was at work, and my wife called me up, and she said the mailman stopped at the door because he can't fit everything in the mailbox. I'm like, what are we talking about? There were 24 submissions that day, and the next day, and the next day, and suddenly Death Realm was a thing. I mean, it had all this material, and so early on I read every word of every submission. I'd try to make a personal response to rejections and such like. Well, that didn't last all that long.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I hear you on all this stuff with Lovecraft eZine.
Yeah.
Progression.
But it became a real labor of love. I enjoyed creating it. I enjoyed editing it. And above all things, since I had the newsstand distribution, I loved seeing it come out on the magazine shelves and such.
Yeah.
Now, over time, it became entirely too big for me to handle, but at the same time, I didn't have financial resources to pay anybody to help me. I ended up getting a deal with Stan Towle of Towle Publishing, who took over basically the business end, the distribution end, all that, while I retained the editorial position. And it was pretty good. It was not a bad arrangement for it. He had a tendency to exert more creative control on it that I was very comfortable with. So
Mm-hmm.
after a time, we parted ways, and then Malicious Press formed. That was a partnership of Lawrence Watt Evans, writer, and Terry Rossio, screenwriter, who wrote like Disney's Aladdin and Pirates of the Caribbean. The old, he had a big catalog of script work he had done. So they put up money as publishers for Death Realm, and that lasted for at least a couple of years. And it was a great, great arrangement. The only thing, because I had complete control once again of what went into the magazine. I had control of the graphics. I was pretty pleased with it. But then the bomb dropped. This would have been 1996 or early 1997. We had a big distribution deal with Fine Print distributors. They distributed to Barnes and Noble and most of the big bookstores.
Right.
And Fine Print went bankrupt, owing us to the tune. I don't remember the exact amount they owed. It was a strong 5 digits that they owed, and it was not something we could just bury and bounce back from.
Yeah.
So we had a little conference about it, Lawrence and Terry and I, and we decided that the best thing to do is just to finally retire Death Realm. This was after 10 years. I'd been doing Death Realm.
10 years is a long time. You guys did great. You did great.
Well, thank you. But
I mean,
if that had happened 5 years,
No.
if that had happened 5 years into Death Realm's career, I might have been more interested in, trying to rebuild from the ground up. But after 10 years, I was tired. The business end of it was 90% of it, and it was affecting my time and ability to write my own work. I just felt it was time to move on. And I know that went way above and beyond your original question, but once I started talking,
It's interesting.
Death Realm, a crap load of history right there.
No, and Death Realm was very acclaimed. It was like in my neck of the
In
woods.
spite of my best efforts.
Yeah. Was something I didn't see copies of very often, and after having read a couple, after that it's like if I saw one, I grabbed it. It's like I ain't got much money this week. Well, I'm not gonna see this again, so the hell with that. Just grab it.
Hey, you were talking about Crypt of Cthulhu being an inspiration to you, right?
Yeah, definitely. I remember being kind of stunned that somebody else had actually heard of Lovecraft.
Well, I had to smile when you were talking about the mailman not being able to fit all the submissions, right away, and it surprised you. I had the same. It was digital, but I had the same type thing happen to me when I was calling for submissions for the first issue. I thought, okay, this is going to just be some small thing, but I want it to be quality. I don't care how small it is. That's the way my thought process went when I was starting Lovecraft eZine, asking for submissions for the first issue. Oh, then I remember I got all these submissions, and I got a submission from William Meikle, and I thought, Meikle, what the hell? I know I've got this guy's books on my shelf.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe this. I can't believe this. So it was kind of inspiring to get that from him. I'll always feel like I owe William Meikle a little bit for sending me a submission, for issue number 1. So.
Yeah, that was one thing I did enjoy about Death Realm, was that I would get material from people I'd never heard of, as well as the people I'd been reading for a long time, and I managed to get a good mix of writers, budding writers as well as very time-proven veterans, and my aim was to put the best work I could in there. I mean, I bounced stories from well-known writers and took stories from people who'd never had a thing published before. It was just what I felt best portrayed the character of the magazine that I wanted. And certainly it leaned toward the Lovecraftian, but I also went for all kinds of things, experimental stuff. I ran some some poetry. I've never been particularly a fan of poetry. Maybe that's a personal failing. But obviously there was a fair market for it, and people were writing some really dynamite stuff. So there was always, readers seemed to appreciate the fact that there was a place for it in there.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a great thing, though. It's like, look at all the good. Karl Edgar Wagner, when he was doing the Dog best series, horror best series, here's a master, and here's somebody you barely never heard of. I mean, Datlow does that. I think all good editors do that. They are looking for new voices, as well as, here's a story by Tanith Lee, and here's a story by somebody. If you do an internet search and you have trouble finding their name, that's one of the big thrills as an editor. Mm-hmm. Whether it's an I mean, you go back to when I was editing Grimscribes. Here's a brand new story by Olivia Llewellyn. It's like, wow, this thing blew my mind. And it's like, I got to read, well, hell, I have the reason she wrote it, but I got to read it first. And then you get a submission by somebody you never heard of, and hardly anybody else knows of them, and you're just, you're floored.
Yeah.
And you think, man, I get to drive the taxi to the hospital to deliver this baby. That's pretty damn cool.
For everybody watching now or the recorded version of this later, go to Lovecraft eZine, and today it's the top post, but if you're watching this later, just type in Mark's name, Stephen Mark Rainey, into the search bar, because Mark listed his Lovecraftian books there, short story collections, novels, and so forth, and check those out. So, thanks for being on the show, Mark. It was a really great time.
I definitely appreciate it. It's always a pleasure, and hopefully we'll all gather again here one of these days.
Oh, you're always welcome.
Oh, yeah.
You have to go to your mom's to get on the video chat, don't you?
I mean, I can always grab a setup, I suppose, but I just know it's not something I'd make use of very often, so I just hadn't done it.
Well, nice to see you again, Mark. Thanks for being on the show, and Matt, Rick, Joe, thanks for being here.
Have a good night.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Talk to you soon. See you next week.
Good night, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks a bunch, everybody.